You climb into bed tonight. You pull the blanket over yourself, spend 40 minutes scrolling through videos you'll forget by tomorrow, make 2 unnecessary trips to the kitchen, then finally drift off to sleep. Simple, comfortable, completely ordinary. Now imagine doing the same thing without the bed, without the blanket, without the walls around you, without electricity, without a locked door, without even knowing what might be waiting beyond the darkness. Instead, you're sitting beside a small fire in the middle of an ancient forest, wrapped in animal hides, listening to something large moving through the bushes just a few meters away. For our ancestors, that wasn't an emergency. That was simply another night. But here's the question almost nobody asks. What actually happened after sunset? When daylight disappeared, when the world became almost completely black, when predators were only beginning their day, and your greatest weapon was a sharpened stone, what was the plan? Did people immediately fall asleep? Did they stay awake? Or did the night become something entirely different from the way we experience it today? We spend nearly a third of our lives asleep, yet we rarely stop to consider how radically different that experience was for almost all of human history. As it turns out, the answer is stranger, more fascinating, and far more human than most people imagine. Let's go back. Long before cities, long before farming, long before civilization itself, before humans mastered fire, before tools became sophisticated, before anything we would recognize as ordinary life existed, our ancestors faced one terrifying reality every single day. Half of their world disappeared into darkness. Not the kind of darkness where streetlights leak through your curtains. Not the kind where your phone battery dies and you can't find the bathroom. Real darkness. The kind where holding your hand in front of your face showed absolutely nothing. The kind where every snapped twig sounded like the beginning of your final moment. And in that darkness, something was always hunting. Lions, hyenas, leopards, saber-toothed cats. Many of the most dangerous predators of the prehistoric world were most active after sunset. As daylight faded, humans stopped being hunters and became potential prey. You didn't need a weather forecast to know what the night would bring. The prediction was always the same: dark, with a very real chance of being eaten. So what did our ancestors do? They stayed together. They searched for places that offered even the smallest advantage: high ground, narrow entrances, natural shelters. Caves became some of the most valuable places on Earth, not because anyone enjoyed living inside cold stone walls, but because a cave offered something priceless: control. With only one entrance, everyone knew exactly where danger could come from. It was humanity's earliest security system. No locks, no alarms, just solid rock and careful positioning. Families slept close together, close enough to share warmth, close enough to hear each other's breathing, close enough that if something entered during the night, nobody would face it alone. Safety wasn't only about numbers. Within every group, someone always slept lightly. Someone shifted, someone listened, someone woke first. Without planning it, humans created one of evolution's simplest but most effective defense systems. Then, around 400,000 years ago, the darkness changed forever. Fire. Reliable control of fire transformed the night forever. Yes, it provided warmth. Yes, it made cooking possible. But perhaps its greatest gift was something far less obvious: light itself. A campfire created an invisible boundary between humans and the darkness surrounding them. Most large predators avoided open flames. Not because fire physically stopped them, but because it disrupted everything their instincts depended upon. They evolved to hunt shadows. Fire erased the shadows. For the first time in history, humans could sit safely in the middle of the night without constantly expecting something to emerge from the darkness. And that single change reshaped far more than survival. From that moment on, the night no longer belonged only to predators. Think about what actually happens around a campfire. You can't really be productive in the modern sense. You can't read a book. You can't answer emails. You can't scroll endlessly through your phone. All you can really do is sit together, watch the flames, and pay attention to the people around you. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, including groups like the Juhonsi of southern Africa and the Hadza of Tanzania, have discovered something remarkable. During the day, conversation is mostly practical. Who's hunting tomorrow? Where should we gather food? Who needs help? It's about coordination, planning, and survival. But when night falls, everything changes. Around the fire, people begin telling stories. Long stories, funny stories, stories about ancestors, stories explaining how the world began, stories about courage, generosity, betrayal, and the kind of person everyone should strive to become. Researchers estimate that nearly 80% of nighttime conversations revolve around storytelling, compared to only a tiny fraction during the day. That difference matters, because stories are far more than entertainment. They're how knowledge survives. They're how traditions move from one generation to the next. They're how people learn who they are. Before writing, before books, before libraries, the campfire became humanity's memory. Every evening, countless generations gathered beneath the stars and passed their world to the next generation through words alone. In many ways, they were doing exactly what we still do today. We watch films, we read novels, we binge television series. Our ancestors simply gathered around fire instead of a screen. The storyteller was the cinema. The flames were the projector. The audience looked exactly like us. This may have been one of the most important moments in human evolution, because sitting together at night didn't merely protect people from predators. It strengthened language. It encouraged empathy. It preserved history. It created shared identity. Some researchers even suggest that these nightly gatherings helped shape the uniquely human ability to imagine things that didn't yet exist. Not a bad achievement for a group of people wrapped in animal skins beside a fire. But the night still holds another surprise. And this one might completely change the way you think about waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Most of us believe healthy sleep means 8 uninterrupted hours. If we wake during the night, we assume something must be wrong. Maybe we're stressed. Maybe we're anxious. Maybe we immediately begin searching the internet for explanations we'd probably rather not read. But history tells a very different story. One historian, Roger Eckertz, spent decades studying thousands of diaries, medical texts, court records, letters, and historical documents. What he found completely challenged our modern understanding of sleep. For much of recorded history, and almost certainly long before written history, people didn't sleep in one continuous block. They slept twice. There was a first sleep and a second sleep. People typically went to bed a few hours after sunset. They slept for roughly 3 or 4 hours. Then they naturally woke up, not frightened, not restless, simply awake. They remained awake for an hour, sometimes 2, before calmly returning to sleep until sunrise. This wasn't unusual. It wasn't insomnia. It was completely normal. References to first sleep and second sleep appear throughout medieval Europe, Roman writings, and even texts dating back to ancient Greece. People mentioned them as casually as we mention breakfast today. It was simply how the night worked. What happened during that quiet period between the two sleeps? Almost everything. Some people prayed. Across many ancient cultures, the deepest hours of the night were believed to be the best time to speak with the divine, when the world was silent and distractions disappeared. Others reflected on their dreams, treating them not as random images, but as meaningful experiences worth understanding. Many couples became intimate during this time, believing the body was fully rested while the mind remained calm and clear. Someone usually added fresh wood to the fire before the coldest hours arrived. Parents fed crying infants. Farmers checked on livestock. In towns and villages, neighbors occasionally visited one another, moving quietly through the darkness, because being awake in the middle of the night wasn't unusual at all. It wasn't called insomnia. It wasn't considered unhealthy. It was simply part of a normal night's rhythm. The phrase, "the watch of the night," appears throughout countless historical texts. Today, we often picture soldiers guarding city walls. Sometimes that's exactly what it meant. But in many cases, it referred to something much simpler. Ordinary people, awake, between their first and second sleep. So why did this pattern disappear? The answer was almost certainly artificial light. Gas lamps arrived, then electricity. People stayed awake longer each evening. Bedtimes moved later. Sleep became compressed into a single uninterrupted block. Eventually, the natural waking period disappeared almost completely. What had once been perfectly normal slowly became something people viewed as a problem. Today, if you wake naturally at 3 in the morning, you might assume your body is malfunctioning. Historically, it may be doing exactly what it evolved to do. If you've ever found yourself lying awake in complete calm before drifting peacefully back to sleep, there's a chance you were experiencing a rhythm your ancestors followed for thousands of years. Your body may simply remember something modern life encouraged it to forget. But the deeper archaeologists look into prehistoric sleep, the more remarkable the story becomes. Early Homo sapiens, and even some of our earlier relatives, didn't simply collapse onto bare ground each night. They prepared for sleep with surprising care. Evidence from Border Cave in present-day South Africa suggests that nearly 200,000 years ago, people deliberately built sleeping platforms using carefully selected grasses and leaves. That alone is impressive. But what researchers found beneath those layers may be even more remarkable. Ash, not scattered accidentally, placed there intentionally. Why? Because ash helps repel insects, ticks, fleas, mites, the tiny creatures that bite sleeping humans and spread disease. Someone, hundreds of thousands of years ago, noticed that insects avoided ash. They tested the idea, repeated it, shared the knowledge. Long before chemistry had a name, people were already applying it. Long before science became a discipline, our ancestors were observing patterns, forming conclusions, and improving their lives through experimentation. That isn't luck. That's scientific thinking in its earliest form. These weren't people merely surviving another night. They were constantly learning how to make the next one safer than the last. In colder parts of the world, however, insects weren't the biggest problem. Cold was. During the Ice Age, temperatures across much of Europe and Central Asia could fall low enough to kill an exposed person within hours. Surviving those nights demanded a completely different strategy. People slept together, not simply because they were family, but because shared body heat meant survival. Several people sleeping side by side created a natural layer of insulation. Every additional person trapped a little more warmth. It was simple physics long before anyone understood the science behind it. Researchers also believe that not everyone in these groups slept the same way. Some individuals naturally slept more lightly than others. They woke more easily. They reacted faster to unfamiliar sounds. This may not have been an accident. A group where everyone slept deeply would have been dangerously vulnerable. But a group containing both heavy and light sleepers always had someone likely to notice trouble first. Without assigning guards, without taking turns, human groups effectively maintained a constant watch throughout the night. Evolution had quietly solved the problem for them. Yet survival and sleep were only part of what the night represented. For countless ancient civilizations, darkness carried an entirely different meaning. It wasn't simply the absence of daylight. It was the most spiritually significant part of existence. And in many ways, that makes perfect sense. Every evening, the sun disappeared. From the perspective of ancient people, it died. It descended beneath the horizon into another world before somehow returning the following morning. Every sunrise was a victory. Every sunset marked the beginning of uncertainty. The ancient Maya built entire calendars around the movements of celestial bodies, visible only after dark. Cities such as Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and Palenque were carefully aligned with important astronomical events. Their observatories tracked Venus with astonishing precision. That planet wasn't simply another object in the sky. It influenced decisions about warfare, leadership, and religious ceremonies. The stars weren't decoration. They were information. Maya priests performed rituals deep into the night, believing their ceremonies helped ensure the sun would complete its dangerous journey through the underworld and rise again the next morning. To us, Those rituals seem symbolic. To them, they were essential, and every sunrise appeared to confirm they had worked. Farther east, in ancient Mesopotamia, scholar priests known as the Baru spent countless nights studying the heavens. Every eclipse, every comet, every unusual movement among the planets was interpreted as a message carrying meaning for kings and entire kingdoms. The conclusions they reached weren't scientifically correct by modern standards, but their method reveals something fascinating. They carefully observed nature, searched for patterns, recorded repeated events, and attempted to predict the future from those observations. The conclusions differed from modern science. The curiosity did not. Humans have always looked upward, searching for answers hidden among the stars. Perhaps nowhere is humanity's relationship with the night more impressive than in the Pacific Ocean. Long before compasses, long before GPS, long before maps accurate enough to trust, Polynesian navigators routinely crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean in wooden canoes. Finding tiny islands scattered across the largest ocean on Earth should have been nearly impossible. Yet they did it again and again. Mostly at night, they memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars throughout the year. They read the rhythm of ocean swells, sensing waves that traveled from distant storms far beyond the horizon. They watched birds returning toward land each evening. They recognized cloud formations that tended to gather above islands hidden from sight. Some even judged subtle differences in water temperature by touch alone. To them, the night sky wasn't mysterious. It was a map. Darkness wasn't an obstacle. It was information. They transformed the stars into one of the most sophisticated navigation systems ever developed without a single instrument. Other civilizations learned to use the night just as creatively. In Iron Age Zimbabwe, skilled metalworkers often preferred working after sunset, not because tradition demanded it, but because darkness revealed something daylight concealed. When iron is heated, its color changes with temperature. During the day, bright sunlight washes out those subtle shifts. At night, every shade of red, orange, and yellow becomes perfectly visible. Darkness allowed craftsmen to judge temperature with remarkable precision. The night itself became a tool. In the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in present-day Pakistan, sanitation workers carried out waste collection after dark. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept one of the world's earliest cities cleaner and healthier. Even 4,000 years ago, some essential jobs belonged to the night. Across Bronze Age Oman, farmers deliberately irrigated crops after sunset. Cooler temperatures reduced evaporation, allowing precious water to soak deeper into the soil instead of disappearing into the air. Centuries before modern agricultural science explained why it worked, they already knew that it did. Far to the north, Viking communities faced a completely different challenge. Winter nights in Scandinavia could last 18 hours or more. Instead of surrendering to the darkness, they adapted. Fish oil and whale fat lamps illuminated their longhouses. Families continued repairing tools, preparing food, sharing stories, and living ordinary lives despite the endless winter night. Every civilization solved darkness differently, but none simply accepted it. And perhaps that's the biggest surprise of all. When we imagine the ancient world after sunset, we picture fear. People hiding inside caves, waiting helplessly for daylight to return. History paints a very different picture. Night was when stories preserved culture, when families gathered together, when sleep followed rhythms our bodies may still remember, when priests studied the heavens, when navigators crossed entire oceans, guided only by stars, when craftsmen shaped glowing iron more accurately because darkness revealed what daylight concealed, when farmers protected their harvests, when civilizations quietly continued living while most of the world slept. The night wasn't empty, it was alive. It followed different rules, demanded different skills, and revealed a completely different side of what it meant to be human. The more we learn about ancient nights, the harder it becomes to see them as empty hours between sunsets and sunrises. For our ancestors, darkness wasn't simply something to endure. It was another half of life, A world with its own routines, its own dangers, its own opportunities. Then, slowly, everything changed. Artificial light pushed the darkness away. Cities glowed through the night. We extended the day until the boundary between daylight and darkness almost disappeared. In many ways, that transformation was extraordinary. Electricity gave us safer homes, modern medicine, instant communication, the ability to work, travel, and live long after the sun had set. Few people would willingly trade those comforts away. But something quietly disappeared along the way. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings knew the night intimately. They recognized the stars overhead. They understood the rhythm of silence. They accepted periods of wakefulness without fear. Stories belonged to the fire. The sky served as both calendar and compass. Darkness wasn't something to escape. It was simply another place where life happened. Today, most of us rarely experience true darkness at all. Streetlights erase the stars. Screens fill every quiet moment. When we wake in the middle of the night, our first instinct is often to reach for a glowing display instead of simply lying still. Perhaps that's why ancient nights feel so unfamiliar, not because they belong to different people, but because they belong to people who had never separated themselves from nature's rhythm. For them, darkness wasn't the opposite of life, it was part of it. So the next time you find yourself awake at 3 in the morning, before reaching for your phone, before convincing yourself something must be wrong, try doing what your ancestors would have done. Stay still. Listen to the silence. Let your thoughts wander without rushing to interrupt them. For countless generations, those quiet hours weren't considered unusual. They were simply another chapter of the night. And maybe, just maybe, your mind isn't malfunctioning at all. Maybe, for a brief moment, it's remembering a rhythm that has echoed through human history for hundreds of thousands of years.